For what purpose, the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Right. This is a very serious subject, and suicides have become just a tremendous pandemic, if we use that word too often, but it's tragic. And all too often, we want to look at well, what's used in the suicide instead of what's causing these suicides. Why are we losing veterans right and left to suicide? Why are we losing active duty military right and left to suicides? Why are we losing young people? And why did the suicide numbers go up as a result of the pandemic? Was it really people being refused the opportunity for a while not to come together as social people, social animals, if you will? We really ought to be looking at those underlying reasons. And it's come up before in discussions about handguns that, and I remember when so many of the Democrats were obstructing an official session of Congress back in June of 2016. It was over their demand that we have a gun law banning some kind of guns because a radical Islamist, as he described on the recording to the Attorney General that he was doing it for Allah, he went into a club and killed a lot of innocent people. I mean, it's the same kind of reasoning that says we've got to get rid of spoons because they're making people fat, make everybody use chopsticks. This deserves the kind of seriousness where you look at what the causes are. And, we've been hearing a great deal in Congress about transgender. We even had, for the first time in the history of Congress, rules changed so that we wouldn't refer to mother, father, sister, daughter, brother. It's because they involve genders. And it brings me back to the most long-term study of transgender that was done by the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. They studied transgenders over a 30-year period. And what struck me, you're 20 times more likely to commit suicide if you're transgender and have had the surgery. And yet, we've been going whole hog into pushing people into transgender. And by that, I'm talking about like hearing a young lady in her 20s recently say she had the surgery. She began to think she was transgender when her middle school teachers were saying, if you look in the mirror and you're not comfortable with what you see, then you're transgender. And so she thought she must be. I don't know anybody in middle school that was comfortable with what they saw when they looked in the mirror. So that was greatly unfair, but we've seen the suicide rates in some of the areas we're encouraging just skyrocket. So I would rather this committee next year, under the next chairman, have some hearings to look at what is really causing the suicide. And if somebody has a gun, that's more likely to cause them to commit suicide, or is that actually not numerically an issue when you look at the number of people that have guns and those that don't, and the numbers of suicides in either? But this deserves some long-term looking rather than encouraging people to give up rights, which has already been mentioned, that opens the door to people being basically threatened into giving up their rights and making it extremely difficult for them ever to get their rights back. So with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Georgia seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Well, I absolutely appreciate the sentiments of our Republican colleague, Mr. Gohmert. I understand, unequivocally, yes, we do need to be dealing with all the social determinants that are creating the problem for suicide. We've not addressed those social determinants, and it is a growing problem. I understand that. But I just want to make sure that we stay on the correct path. This amendment doesn't do anything other than just allow the ability for an individual that is suffering or believes that they might be in crisis, have the ability to go ahead and place themselves on a list voluntarily. But with that, I'd like to go ahead and give the rest of my time to my respected colleague from Rhode Island, David Cicilline.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I want to just say, Mr. Gohmert, to respond to your question, there is an enormous amount of challenge to the trans community in this country, and the skyrocketing rates of suicide among LGBTQ people in America is in part because of the fact that they live in a country that doesn't fully afford them equality, and that they suffer legal discrimination in a majority of states in this country. They are subjected to horrific bullying and violence and threats of violence and isolation. And so I hope you're serious about dealing with the underlying causes of suicide. One of the ways we could, no, I'm not done yet.
Okay.
I'm happy to yield when I finish. One of the ways that we can deal with the underlying causes of suicide for members of the LGBTQ community is be sure that we work hard to make sure that members of the LGBTQ community enjoy full protection and can live lives free from discrimination of any kind. We've had the opportunity to do that. We've passed the Equality Act. We passed the Global Respect Act. We've passed a number of things out of the House with very little, I think 2 Republican people voting in support of it. So providing basic protections against discrimination, so like every other American, members of our community can live lives free from discrimination, would be a good first step if we want to try to prevent suicide among LGBTQ people. So I hope you're serious about that and look forward to your support of ours to do so. The second point I want to make is this whole notion of we have no role in helping people preserve their own lives is wrong. Every citizen in this country is entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life comes first. This is a proposal that will make it easier for people to stay alive by participating, if they choose to, in a voluntary program to put a firearm out of their reach when they know it poses a threat to their life. This is not a hard thing. This is a basic responsibility of government articulated by our founders, a right of every citizen to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I don't think this is any mystery that we have no duty or no obligation we're not authorized to create a voluntary program that can help people remain alive. And with that, I'm happy to yield back to Ms. McBath and thank her for yielding the time.
I yield the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentlelady yields back for purposes the gentlelady from Washington.
I do have some unanimous consent requests. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a statement from Laurel Stein, the Executive Vice President, Chief Policy Officer of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. The foundation strongly supports the bill. I also ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a statement from the American Bar Association expressing support for this legislation. Also, a statement from Dr. Matthew Miller, co-director of the Harvard Injury Control Research Center, who details the research that has been done that have led into this bill. Also, a statement from Brady, which details the alarming increase in firearm suicide rates and the ability for gun owners and mental health advocates alike to support the legislation. Also, a statement from the student that I mentioned, PhD student Jack Kappelman, as he shares the harrowing experience of his almost attempting suicide by firearm twice and how much he wants this bill to pass. Also, an opinion article from the Washington Post in which Brian Banks explains that people who are prone to suicidal thoughts and behaviors need this bill, which allows us to protect ourselves from our unwell selves. Also, a statement from Professor Frederick Vars, an incredible champion for this policy, detailing the extensive research he's done on the potential life-saving benefits of the bill, as well as his own struggle with bipolar disorder and the need for a bill like this. And finally, a statement from Dr. Joseph Simonetti, a physician and suicide prevention researcher who states that the bill is an important addition to the national toolbox for suicide prevention. And finally, a statement from Giffords Law Center in strong support of this life-saving legislation, and a statement from March for Our Lives emphasizing the outsized burden that mental health issues and suicide put on veterans and how this bill would help them.
Without objection. For our purposes, the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition.
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield to the gentleman from Texas.
I thank the gentleman, and I appreciate a friend across the aisle talking about the struggles of the LGBT community. But as I mentioned, the study that I referenced from the Karolinska Institute was a Swedish study. They have very different environment in Sweden. This was not the United States. It can't be blamed on transphobes or whatever. This was done in Sweden. So that's not a good way to dismiss that particular 30-year study. But it is so important to understand that, and I have to tell people that come up here lobbying or that live in Washington lobbying, and they say, well, let's just get Congress to pass this. We go, but this is a state's right. The 10th Amendment makes clear this is not an enumerated power of the federal government, so let the states handle it. And they go, but yeah, it's just so much easier to only have to lobby in Washington and not have to go to 50 states. And that's the kind of thing that has stolen the rights of the states that the Constitution has given them in order, as my friend Mr. Bishop points out, to be the laboratory to explore different things. Do they work? And if they do, then other states can pick them up. But we are destroying the federalism simply because it is easier to lobby one place in Washington than any others. And if we allow states to do it and it looks like it actually works, then other states will want to do it. And I know there are colleagues on the other side of the aisle that understand about the spousal abuse issue. And this was brought up by a Republican a moment ago. I forget exactly whom, but as somebody here who has tried to prosecute abusive husbands and has spent time begging women not to withdraw their affidavit or say that they lied in their affidavit when you know that they didn't. You took the pictures, you saw the beating they took, but they say, no, if you try to prosecute him now, I will just say he was acting in self-defense. Some husbands get extremely abusive, and it is entirely logical that an abusive spouse would force a wife to go enroll in this program because he doesn't want her to have the opportunity to get a gun to protect herself, and that would keep her even more weak. Let's leave this to the states and see if it really works in one of those laboratories, that state. But I have immense concern as somebody that has seen how abusive husbands can be, how manipulative, and the wives come in beaten and battered, it was all my fault. Well, that would be so easy for that abusive husband to make her give up her right, her Second Amendment right, and this we would be facilitating helping that bully husband. I just think it's better considered to leave this to the states. And I yield back to my friend from Ohio.
Yield back.